Good evening and thanks for joining us. This is NTD Business and I'm Paul Graney. The US economy saw record growth in the last quarter. Where did it come from? And what are the presidential candidates saying about it? I asked the Epoch Times Washington correspondent Demella Khan. And demand for pantry items has soared over the past few weeks. Are we in for a second wave of food stockpiling? And is the industry ready this time? One of the largest food delivery apps gets sued for allegedly listing restaurants without permission. We hear from one of the restaurant owners leading the suit. And Costco drops a coconut milk brand over forced labor allegations. But it's not over human forced labor. GDP numbers are out and the American economy grew at a record rate in the third quarter. Maybe not surprising as businesses reopened in the third quarter after being locked down in the second. Here's the details.
The Commerce Department says the U.S. economy expanded by 33.1% in the third quarter, setting a new historic record. The U.S. economy has now regained around two-thirds of the economic output lost due to the pandemic. White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow hailed the record number, saying it exceeded all expectations. The Trump campaign called the big number a validation of President Trump's policies, which create jobs and opportunities for Americans in every corner of the country. Still, while the economy recovered a large portion of outbreak-related losses, it still remains below pre-pandemic levels. In a separate report, the Labor Department said there are still some 22.6 million Americans receiving some form of unemployment compensation in the week ending October 10th. By comparison, there were around 1.4 million in the comparable week last year. Despite the strong third quarter GDP number, the economy continues to face difficulties, including resurging cases of the CCP virus. The Commerce Department also announced that disposable personal income fell by nearly $637 billion in the third quarter, or 13.2%, after surging by over 44% in the second quarter, driven by historic levels of federal stimulus. This suggests a possible drag on consumer spending, which is a major driver of the economy.
Demella Khan is the Washington correspondent for the Epoch Times, and she's been tracking the response to the GDP numbers. One thing she told me that the growth wasn't based on increased government spending. Government spending actually fell in the second quarter as the CARES Act expired. It was actually consumer spending that drove the growth, which is a very positive sign. But as we heard just now, consumer spending may start to slow up as the stimulus starts to dry up. But it seems the positive numbers weren't enough to bring the presidential candidates together. They have very different views on today's result. I asked Khan about it.
After the release of the data, GDP growth data by the Commerce Department, we saw both Trump and Biden coming up with statements. President Trump tweeted this morning saying that the next year will be fantastic, but he said if Biden wins with the tax hikes, this growth will be stalled by Biden. Vice President Biden, former Vice President Biden, also came out with a statement. He said that the growth, the economic data wasn't really a strong recovery. He said that there is some slowdown in recovery, and he accused Trump of not handling the virus well and causing recession. And he also, as we discussed earlier, he also talked about K-shaped recovery, where you see the certain parts of the economy still not recovering and certain segments of the society not benefiting from the recovery. But this is a political statement, as we know. We have been talking about this K-shaped recovery. As you know, most countries went through the same kind of recession after the pandemic and because of the lockdowns. Indeed, IMF said that the U.S. economy is recovering better than anticipated, and they upgraded their forecast recently.
Wall Street actually closed higher today after its 3% slide yesterday. President, I'm sure, breathing a sigh of relief. The Dow climbed over 139 points or 0.52%, S&P 500 just more than 39 points or 1.19%. The Nasdaq added about 181 points or 1.64%. Big tech stocks reported their earnings today after market. Amazon, Twitter, Facebook all beating estimates. But the two social media platforms actually fell short on user growth. Google parent Alphabet also reported much higher profits than expected. The CBOE Volatility Index surged to a 15-week high this week. Investors, I'm sure, worried about surging virus cases. According to Dr. Fauci, cases are rising in 47 states and patients were overwhelming hospitals across the country. And a second wave of food stockpiling may also be here. Demand for pantry items is up, with one e-commerce expert saying they've seen drastic increases in the past 3 or 4 weeks, similar to the stockpiling we saw during the first wave of the pandemic. NTD's Patrick Hayden has the details.
American consumers are starting to stockpile food again. Web traffic stats show that demand for baking products was up 3,400% in October compared to the same period last year. We spoke to a web traffic's insight company to see what else they found.
We've seen that similar sort of large increase, 1,000+% increase, but now we're seeing it both across different categories within the supermarket as well as other retail verticals.
Americans are stocking up in part because of the holidays and possible increases in virus cases. They say food makers are more prepared this time.
A lot of the problems that plague companies like Instacart and grocery delivery services that couldn't fulfill that new demand, they've quelled a lot of that. They've added an incredible amount of labor as well as a lot of retail chains.
He says the fourth quarter sales are critical to a lot of businesses. For food, he says that there is going to be less choice, but availability of core essential products should be better than at the height of the pandemic in April.
So as a consumer, you might notice this holiday season some differences in some fringe sort of items, but hopefully a little bit less of the mass out of stocks.
He says food maker General Mills has invested tens of millions of dollars in their facilities just to keep up. The company says it doesn't expect its inventories to normalize until next June. Until then, they expect demand to fluctuate. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And it's not just the virus they're worried about in Washington, D.C. Some businesses there are boarding up their stores to prepare for potential unrest on Election Day. Really not something you like to report on.
Near the White House, stores and office buildings boarded up doors and windows. Crews of workers also kept busy at multiple locations in the capital city, securing plywood boarding across storefronts. One of those stores is the luxury City 2 shopping center. It's just blocks away from the president's residence and adjacent Black Lives Matter plaza. Early voting is underway in Washington in an attempt to ease crowds on Election Day. Across the nation, more than 75 million people have already cast early in-person and mail ballots. That is a record-setting pace and more than 53% of the total 2016 turnout. Polls in battleground states that might decide the election suggest the race could be tight.
And some updates on American corporates. GrubHub is being sued for allegedly adding thousands of restaurants to its website without the owner's permission. Apparently, if somebody ordered from that restaurant, the delivery guy would just turn up and place the order himself or herself. You might think, well, isn't that great business for restaurants? But the suit claims GrubHub is using their names, logos, and menus unlawfully. NTD's Phil Zoe spoke to one of the restaurant owners leading the suit.
2 restaurant owners in California and North Carolina are suing GrubHub for allegedly adding 150,000 restaurants to its database without permission. One of the restaurant owners leading the lawsuit told NTD News GrubHub is getting around this by telling its delivery guys to order directly from the restaurants. Afterwards, they pick up the orders pretending to be customers.
They call up as a customer, they order as a customer, and then they show up, picking up as a customer. Now, you know that it's GrubHub because they have a big, hot bag a lot of times that says GrubHub on it.
Pearson says the biggest problem is being misrepresented by someone you didn't even hire. He called the food delivery app multiple times to get his menu off the site, but GrubHub wouldn't do it.
Every single order that goes out is unbelievably important to me, and I don't want to be represented by somebody that doesn't have my best interest in mind. And in essence, GrubHub does not have my best interest in mind. They have GrubHub's best interest in mind.
He says GrubHub never approached him for a partnership in the first place, but even if they did, he would pass. He doesn't understand why any restaurant would. The fees are too high.
From what I understand, they want 30% of the cost of the order in order to be partnered with them. The average profit for a restaurant is about 5% of gross sales. So to give up 30% of an order is sort of usurious and slanted towards GrubHub. A restaurant can't survive if they only make 70% of what they charge.
The lawsuit was filed on Monday. Pearson says he wants GrubHub to leave his mom and pop business alone. He says it's tough enough for his business to survive because of the pandemic. Phil Zhou, NTD News.
GrubHub told us that it doesn't comment on pending lawsuits, but it did reference an article from Eater that showed that other delivery apps like DoorDash or Postmates have also gotten in trouble in the past for adding restaurants without their permission. Terrible. And Costco will reportedly no longer sell coconut milk from Thailand-based producer Chow Ka. It's because of allegations of monkey labor. PETA says it comes after their undercover investigation, which revealed captive monkeys were picking up the coconuts. The animals' human rights organization says Costco is joining thousands of other stores, including Walgreens and Food Lion, that have already banned coconut milk that uses monkey labor. PETA says Costco will resume stocking the products once new policies are implemented. The maker of Chow Ka coconut milk, though, told USA Today that it doesn't engage in monkey labor on its coconut plantations. And France's Louis Vuitton will pay slightly less for U.S. jeweler Tiffany. The two companies agreed to end their dispute, which was triggered by the pandemic. They salvaged the luxury sector's biggest ever deal.
A bitter legal battle between two of the world's top luxury goods makers came to an end Thursday when US jeweller Tiffany agreed with LVMH to lower its buyout price. It means the French luxury group can move ahead with its takeover for a total of $15.8 billion. The two fell out after LVMH said in September it could no longer complete a deal agreed last year. It blamed what it called Tiffany's dismal performance during the health crisis and a French government letter asking it to delay the buyout. Those issues now look to be solved, and LVMH has achieved its goal of lowering the cost of the takeover. A new price has been set at $131.5 a share, down from $135 in the original deal. That means a total discount of $425 million for LVMH. In a statement, the two companies confirmed they had agreed to settle their pending litigation. The takeover had already been cleared by antitrust regulators and is expected to close in early 2021, subject to Tiffany shareholder approval.
Big deal. Still to come. A Taiwanese company pleads guilty to trade secret theft. The DOJ says it's one of the largest prosecutions of its kind ever. And Chinese tech companies feel the pressure from US sanctions. They're trying to develop their own technology, but are they succeeding? More on that when we return. Welcome back. A Taiwanese chip maker called UMC has pleaded guilty to trade secret theft here in the United States. The company will now have to pay a $60 million fine. The Taiwanese company was accused of helping a Chinese state-owned chip maker steal secrets from Micron Technology. It's an American company. It's the second largest fine ever in a criminal trade secret prosecution. UMC is a Chinese company, and 3 individuals were indicted in 2018 for conspiracy to steal trade secrets from Micron. UMC said its management wasn't aware of it and didn't authorize the action taken by the employees. They previously worked for Micron. U.S. sanctions on Chinese telecom companies Huawei and ZTE appeared to be a wake-up call for the country's chip industry. Poor funding and management practices, as well as a lack of expertise, have now led to more and more bankruptcies.
A wave of Chinese chip-making companies going bankrupt has caught the public eye. 6 of them, worth around $1.5 billion each, recently declared bankruptcy. 2 major Chinese ministries related to the industry responded to the news last week. They admit that policy and funding incentives have caused serious problems in the industry, and that duplicated work and many new companies joining the industry has led to a tremendous waste of resources. The news immediately struck to stock markets. Chip and semiconductor-related stocks plunged after days of highs. Douglas Fuller is a professor at Hong Kong City University and an expert on China's industrial policy in the chip sector. He revealed in a report that the wave of new manufacturers entering the industry is being driven by subsidies, or what he called the hope for even more subsidies. Financial Times quoted the U.S.-based Semiconductor Industry Association on the massive scale of Beijing's subsidies, saying Beijing subsidized chip makers with up to $50 billion over the past 20 years. While a report from the OECD stated that 2 Chinese chip giants received government support totaling to about 1/3 of their revenue. As for another semiconductor maker named Silicom, 50% of its net income is acquired through subsidies for the past 3 years. During the first 3 quarters of this year, over 13,000 small and mid-sized enterprises have registered as semiconductor companies. It marks a 30% growth spurt compared to last year. Many of the new registrations lack professional experience in the industry. Chips are the driving force behind nearly all high-tech industries. They're found everywhere, from smartphones to cloud computing to cars. For now, China is only capable of mass-producing 14-nanometer chips. Compared with other top chip makers, that's an estimated 15-year development gap behind the United States. That means China still heavily relies on foreign chip imports.
And still to come this evening, Detroit automakers work at close to full speed despite a rise in local virus cases. How are they keeping their employees safe? We take it to the factory floor to find out. And how would you like to have a flying car and actually be able to use it around town? We visit one place where it's now a reality. More on that when we return. Welcome back. Even though virus cases are rising in some cities where there are auto factories, the industry isn't seeing a spike of new cases on factory floors. Maybe thanks to the safety protocols they've put in place. Here's what automakers are doing to keep their employees safe.
Temperature checks before getting onto the factory floor, social distancing during lunch breaks, masks on at all times while working, and cleaning. That's how auto factories in the Midwest and the South are running at near full speed, even though COVID-19 cases are surging in the communities right outside their factory walls. So far, there's been no major outbreaks on any of the factory floors operated by Detroit's Big Three, since General Motors, Ford, and Fiat Chrysler resumed production in May after the pandemic forced an unprecedented 2-month shutdown. Some workers have tested positive for the coronavirus, but safety measures put in place, like having employees log in their health condition into a smartphone app, have largely kept those cases contained. But in this health crisis, it's the face mask that has become the assembly line's greatest tool. GM's head of global manufacturing put it in simple words, telling Reuters, as far as protecting workers on the job, quote, "The mask is the foundation." Face coverings might be a political controversy outside the factory floor, but it's made for a rare show of unity between management and the United Auto Workers, which represents 156,000 factory employees. No mask, no work. Labor and management have formed a task force that meets bi-weekly, an extraordinary level of coordination to share information and coordinate safety policies. But the fight to keep COVID-19 out of the factory hasn't been without challenges. Since face masks cover the mouth and nose, some workers say their breathing is restricted, making physical labor sometimes difficult, and the face coverings make it harder to communicate on an already noisy factory floor. Automakers have good reason to make sure their workers stay healthy. There's been a boom in auto sales as many Americans shun public transportation, and that stronger than expected sales recovery has automakers racing to keep up. And
Australian winemakers are toasting their home market. Between lockdowns, wine dumping accusations from China, and a drop in tourists, they've had to come up with a brand new strategy.
Australia's wine country has a new strategy for the triple threat of restaurant lockdowns, almost no foreign tourists, and plummeting sales overseas. Vineyards are turning to their fellow Australians. And with overseas holidays off the table due to COVID-19, winemakers in the Hunter Valley like Bruce Tyrrell say Aussies are heading in for tastings like never before. Though social distancing has meant a change for Tyrrell's cellar door. That is the area where you can sample wine. It's served up as a set rather than ad hoc at the bar.
COVID has changed cellar door in Australia, that experience forever, and I think very much for the better. As far as our average sale is concerned, that's doubled. So financially, yeah, it's been great.
The global health crisis came as profits slump in the United States and as Aussie wine exports to China take a dive. That's especially bad news for winemakers. China buys 40% of the bottles Australia sells overseas. Politically, ties with Beijing have hit a rough patch, and China is investigating whether Australian wine exporters were shipping product at a loss to capture more of the market, otherwise known as dumping. Winemaker Savannah Peterson says claims of dumping are false, and that for her, the opposite was true.
So all of our wine, I've never sold out of my wine, so I don't even have the wine to dump. I wish that I did, but unfortunately I don't. Once things open up and they do get back to normal, once people from this area and Sydney and New South Wales start travelling in other areas, and maybe we don't see as many of those domestic tourists that we have been, and we do start getting more Chinese clients, we can't wait to send more wine back over there. But for us, it's always been about sending the premium wine over there, boutique, small amounts, not a dumping ground at all.
While it may be tough to make back for the losses from the weeks of COVID-19 shutdowns, data shows Australian thirst for wine has also seen a sharp jump, up 7% for the year to August.
And a Dutch company says its flying car is now street legal in Europe. Plans to begin deliveries of the two-seater aircraft as early as 2022.
Dutch company Paul V says its Liberty flying car has been approved for use on roads in the European Union. Certification included brake, emissions, and noise pollution testing.
Road and air regulations, they have never been built together to apply to one vehicle. So making this jigsaw puzzle where you can fit both regulations is a very, very big puzzle, which in the end ends up with about 5,000 requirements.
The Paul V Liberty is a three-wheeled, two-seater car and gyroplane combined into one. Pilots will need a license to fly one. It claims to drive at up to 100 miles per hour, fly up to 110 miles per hour, and can fly about 310 miles on a single tank of fuel. Switching from road to aircraft mode takes about 10 minutes.
The industry of personal flying is really starting now with fly driving products, which makes flying much more handy and useful, and there are other segments to come.
According to the company, that includes performing the necessary checks. The firm's founder and CEO says the first 90 limited edition versions will be priced at around $585,000 when they begin shipping in 2022. After that, standard versions will start from about $468,000.
That's all the business updates for today. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.